as I said just now, thank you to the chairman, and also thank you to the CPOPC for inviting me to speak at this webinar. Before we proceed, I would like to thank Dr. Ibu Rusdiana for providing some of the basic stuff that saved me a lot of trouble in trying to explain some of the basic background behind the topic for today's discussion. Okay, basically what we are going to talk today is regarding net zero emission, in particular the greenhouse gas. The most common greenhouse gas, I think I've got some problem here. Okay, as I said just now, the most common types of GHG emitted are the carbon dioxide, followed by methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorocarbon. All these results in the, is being released to the atmosphere, and it makes the Earth's surface warmer. What are the activities that increase GHG in the atmosphere? As we all know, burning of fossil fuel stands up top, followed by fluoride gas and deforestation. And deforestation is one of the main topics that has been used by the nemesis of palm oil. So as a result of this increased temperature of Earth, because of this increase in temperature, the Earth become warmer, and as a result, we have an increase in the average global temperature, and it will impact the human and the environmental health. This whole phenomenon is called the greenhouse effect. Now, let us look at, let us look at the most, the countries that is responsible for emitting the most amount of GHG from surveys that have been done between 1750 to 2020. Okay, if you were to look at this particular slide, you can see that topping the list are mainly developed countries. USA itself is responsible for 24.5% of the carbon dioxide release, followed by countries like China, Russia, Germany, and UK. And if you were to compare Malaysia, where does Malaysia stand? Malaysia only produce about 0.4% of those GHG, and that is about 6 billion tons of CO2. Okay, it is important to note that the CO2 released into the atmosphere will remain accumulated unless it is being sequestered by plants or microbes. And this is where, like what was mentioned by Ibu Rusdiana just now, oil palm play a very important role in sequestering the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Okay, if you were to look at the top CO2 emitting countries based per capita, and you will see that the trend is changing between, from developed countries to developing countries. And you can see that here, countries like Qatar, Kuwait, Gibraltar, and Bahrain are topping the per capita CO2 emitted into the atmosphere. And Malaysia is also not doing very well because per capita CO2 released by Malaysian stands at 8.72 ton per person, and which is way above the global average. Okay, I would like to draw your attention to look at where Malaysia stands as far as per capita CO2 emission with respect to other countries. I purposely pick some of the countries which are strong advocate for no deforestation, who are known to be singling out palm oil as the main cause of deforestation. We look at Malaysia versus European Union 27. While the EU 27 was was enjoying the release of CO2 for almost 2.5 centuries, Malaysia was still struggling at releasing only 2.03 ton per capita. Now, even though the per capita CO2 emission by EU27 has reduced from 10.12 ton per capita, Malaysia still stands at 8.42. And similarly, the same case is observed if we were to compare Malaysia versus United Kingdom. And again, we can see that the CO2 emission from UK was way ahead of Malaysia. And while they were enjoying, or they were releasing about 11.74 ton per capita, Malaysia was only releasing about 1.35 ton per capita. And one interesting thing about Belgium, Germany, and Netherlands, these are countries which have been, singling out palm oil as the main cause of deforestation. And you look at their performance, it is something that, which is not far different from what Malaysia is doing. Okay. Comparing the main source of gas emission from EU, Malaysia, the biggest contributor is from the energy industry, transportation, industrial processes, and agriculture only contribute to about 4.4% of the total GHG emission. And this is also, comparative to what the EU are doing. Okay, detailed amount of CO2 emission is listed here. And one thing that I would like to highlight is that being a forested a forested country where we have about 6.23% of our land area to be covered with forests, as reported by the FAO, we have got a default value of about 130.2 million ton of CO2 being released. So this is one of the things that countries like Malaysia and Indonesia will be enjoying, but will not be enjoyed by countries where the percentage of forest cover has been very much reduced. Okay, what are Malaysian commitment on the GHG? For the 2030 goal, Malaysia hopes to reduce the intensity of greenhouse gas emission across the economy by 45% based on the GDP. And recently, the Prime Minister of Malaysia announced that Malaysia aspires to achieve a net zero greenhouse gas emission as early as 2050. These are our commitment to the world. Okay, I would like to highlight this particular slide, especially the oil palm growing region, or can I say that the world oil palm growing belt. Those blue dots are basically the amount of CO2 being released to the atmosphere, and the bigger the dots, the more CO2 are being released. And if you were to look at the oil palm growing region, the blue dots are very, very small compared to the Northern Hemisphere, especially in Europe and also in US. Okay, going back to Malaysian palm oil industry, we have a total land of 32.98 million hectares, and the total forested land is about 20.45 million hectares, or 62.3%, as reported by FAO. And from the 32.98 million hectares, we have 8.57 million hectares used for agricultural activities. And from this 8.57 million hectares, 5.89 million hectares are being planted with oil palm. And one interesting thing that was highlighted by Hansen in 1999 is that a hectare of oil palm trees can absorb a net amount of 64 tons of CO2 each year and produces about 18 tons of oxygen, which is higher than a normal forest net absorption. And however, in the peatland areas, we have a different scenario. But it is important to highlight that, oil palm has got a lot of attributes, but it is frequently associated with deforestation and significant GHG emission. Leading palm oil producers in Malaysia and Indonesia are actively promoting sustainable palm oil through RSPO, MSPO, and ISPO, and the production and transitioning to net zero emission. Okay, if you were to look in detail, the most important role in GHG budget for the oil palm industry come from land use conversion, as what has been mentioned by Dr. Rusdiana just now. In Malaysia, we are addressing that land use conversion in various approaches. I will explain that later on. Because of the difference in land use conversion, we observe a different value with respect to CO2 emission from oil palm plantation that are being reported for planting of a log forest or rubber plantation or grassland or paddy field or even replanting. So in the case of replanting, the carbon loss from cleared palms is balanced by the sequestration in the current crop. So the main emission sources in the oil palm industry come from the land use change. It can be as high as 40%, especially if it's from a virgin forest. Methane production, especially at the mills, direct use of fossil fuel, especially in the case of transportation, indirect land use of fossil fuel in operating some of the machineries that we have in the mills, and also from nitrous oxide production from the application of pesticides and fertilizer. Okay, in our approach trying to manage the GHG emission, we are looking at both downstream and upstream, as what has been explained by palm GHG developed by a group spearheaded by RSPO. In this case, we can see that the GHG may come from fertilizers, from exposed land areas during replanting, from exposed land during replanting, from the production of methanes during milling processes, from the use of fossil fuel in transportation, and all those related activities. Okay, what does the government do in terms of helping our initiative to reduce GHG emission? One of the first thing that they did was in 2019, they announced a policy to cap the total oil palm cultivation area to 6.5 million hectares. Currently, we have about 6.1, 6.2, or even 6.3. So we have only about 200 to 300,000 hectares left for us to expand the oil palm cultivation. So what does this mean? So it means that there will not be any more cutting down of forests or land areas that are suitable for the cultivation of oil palm. And this will address the land use change issues. Then we have also a policy that was put in place in 2019 to ban all new planting on peatland. So there will be no new planting on peatland areas. Again, this will also address the issues related to land use change. And they also ban the conversion of forest reserve for oil palm cultivation. Okay, these are new policies that was put in place by the government in 2019. But I would say that this policy will have some challenges in the implementation, because land matters is under the jurisdiction of the state issues in Malaysia. So these are federal laws, but it may face challenges with respect to the land issues that is being under the jurisdiction of the state areas. Okay, now let us look at what has been done by the various companies in Malaysia. For your information, we have about 5.89 to 6.2 million hectares of oil palm cultivated in Malaysia, and 28% of those are under the smallholders scheme. Okay, and we know that for any initiative in relation to GHG emission, the smallholders will not be able to address them themselves. This is a challenge. Luckily, in Malaysia, we have avenues like FELDA and FELCRA that manages organized smallholders. So these companies are basically involved in initiating initiatives to reduce GHG emission. Okay, I would like to highlight some of the selected companies in Malaysia, especially one of the biggest company in the world, SIMW Plantation. They have able to reduce 40%. In fact, they are aiming to reduce 40% of CO2 emission by 2030. And how they are going to do this is by their biogas program, where they have got about 30 mills, 30 plus mills, and they will have biogas program in all their mills. In addition to that, they are also actively involved in tree planting programs, which will help to absorb the CO2 from the atmosphere. For IJM Plantation, they also have a target of reducing about 30% of CO2 emission by 2030 through programs like tree planting, process plant improvement, reduction in the use of inorganic fertilizers, and reduction in the fossil fuel usage in their operation. So these are some of the initiatives being implemented by IJM Plantation to achieve a 30% CO2 emission reduction by 2030. Similarly, in the case of IOI Plantation, they have got a 5-year target to reduce GHG emission. They have achieved a 25.9% reduction in 2020 compared to what they have reported a year before. And 10 out of their 15 mills have got methane capture facilities. They have also programs on rehabilitation and conservation of vegetation, maximizing of carbon CO2 sequestration by increasing palm stand per hectare. This is also one of their initiatives by increasing the density of the palm. They are also improving their energy efficiency through technology and innovation. For FELDA and FGV, to reduce CO2 emission, they have got 27 biogas programs under their operation. They are using biomass for electricity, using 100% of treated EFB and linked to the national grid. They also use biocompressed natural gas for use in all company vehicles, and they have improved system in producing clear water and safe water for the worker using an RO system. And lastly, United Plantation Berhad, they have achieved a 59% reduction in CO2 emission compared from what has been reported for 2004. And they are still targeting to reduce 60% of CO2 emission by 2025. So in this effort, they have put places some of the projects like ILUC related projects. They have nature conservation. They have expanded their light rail network that uses 1/10 of fossil fuels consumption for all their in-field collection of their harvest crops. And they also completely remove monocrotophos in their operation in addressing bagworm incidences. So in conclusion, I would say that there are many initiatives that has been taken by various companies. As I mentioned just now, land use change can contribute to as high as 40% of the source of GHG emissions. And this is one of the main focus that was put in place by various companies and also by the government. With the capping of the area planted, with the ban on the planting on new on peatland areas, And with a ban of planting on forest reserve areas, this will address the land use change significantly. We also employ cover crops and also implement tree planting. Cover crops normally takes quite a bit of time during replanting processes, and this has to be hastened so that the exposure of the cleared land is much shorter during replanting. However, please bear in mind that replanting only occurs every 25 years in the life cycle of an economic oil palm life cycle. And it is important to note that we do not replant 100% of our land areas. We only replant 4% of the total planted areas every year. And this is a very, very small area that is being exposed directly to the atmosphere. There are also serious initiatives by various companies to increase the utilization of organic fertilizers as opposed to inorganic fertilizers. And as mentioned just now, IOI has embarked on the high planting density as one of the initiatives to address the GHG emission. Okay, in addition to what has been mentioned, the improved crop evacuation, the improved in-field operation are all being put in place by various companies, by various approaches, so that they can optimize and make the whole operation more efficient. And the methane capture policy was put in place by the government in 2017, where all new mills have to be equipped with methane capture, and all old mills were given 2 years to have their mills to be equipped with methane capture facilities. So these are some of the initiatives taken by the government and being supported by the various companies and the industries in efforts to reduce GHG emission towards a net zero emission. So with that, I thank you for your attention.